Ace Combat Shattered Electrosphere. Mission 2 Ghosts of the Past. 2:57 p.m. April 14th, 2040. Expo City, Uja. When the sun rose after the tragedy, the city still smoldered. After a frantic night of sudden disaster, lethal confusion, and desperate rescue attempts, the people of the once bustling metropolis still had no idea what had killed their loved ones. Several hours into the day, well after most fires were out and all rescues were concluded, runners were dispatched to tell the populace that a citywide briefing was to be held at UPEO headquarters. Words slowly filtered out, and a few hours later nearly 1,000 people had walked into the large parking lot of Newark Airport, where a flagpole had been put up flying the UPEO colors. Beneath the flapping dove was an open-topped double-decker sightseeing tour bus, rigged with sound-powered megaphones. A woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a green-gray military officer's uniform, ascended the bus's external steps, cleared her throat, and addressed the crowd. Fellow citizens of Expo City, my name is Nemo A.I, Acting Commander of the Special Armed Response Force, and the Acting Commander of UPEO Newark. Last night, at 10:54 p.m. local time, there was a coordinated global cyber-terrorist attack of unprecedented scope and scale. This massive and apparently indiscriminate attack has effectively destroyed the Electrosphere, along with virtually every computer system, likely worldwide. Even hardened systems, and those unconnected to any network, have been rendered permanently disabled. The only systems remaining, besides those in our deepest shielded bunkers, are analog computers, such as those that rely on vacuum tubes. The bunkers in question were directly underneath Newark, 2 miles deep and shielded by 100 meters of lead. Commander Shalaji continued, Information is therefore slow in coming in, but the result of the attack has been a substantial loss of life across Expo City, and likely the world. Rescue efforts for the multiple aircraft crashes and innumerable vehicle incidents around the city have largely concluded, and the efforts of the Expo City's first responders and healthcare providers, bolstered by UPEO service members, have already saved over 1,000 lives. The mood of the crowd began to transform from a wary silence into a hopeful one. Commander Shalaji had been thrust into the situation by the untimely deaths of Gilbert Park and several other senior UPEO leaders, but she was stepping up to the plate. Seeing the crowd's mood shift, her tone shifted to match. We have yet to uncover the identity of the attackers, but due to the nature of the attack, immediate military confrontation appears impossible. Regardless, we will root out these terrorists, and justice will. A man in a similar gray-green officer's uniform ran up the bus's stairs and whispered something in the commander's ear. Suddenly, shock and horror transparently slammed into Shalaji's face. Covering the mouthpiece of the sound-powered megaphone, she asked something terse and direct. The messenger replied with a single word. The commander thought for a few moments and grasped the megaphone. An emergency situation has been brought to my attention. Return to your homes and shelter there. Any pilots in attendance, immediately come to the bus. Encouraged by UPEO security personnel, the crowd began to shakily disperse while two figures separately made their way forward. A few minutes later, a mid-20s brunette and a silver-haired septuagenarian arrived at the foot of the commandeered sightseeing bus. The crowd had already mostly receded. When Commander Shalaji turned to see the pilot, she visibly grimaced, if only just. Is this all we have? The disbelief in her question stung. The brunette, clad in a somewhat rumpled white flight suit, replied crisply. Unfortunately, ma'am. Captain Fiona Fitzgerald, tag name Sister, reporting. Fiona snapped off a salute, which the commander returned. So she can be a soldier, the septuagenarian thought of the younger pilot. His only experience with her was overhearing Fiona's teary reaction to the news of her squadron mates' deaths. The commander's gaze turned his way, and he looked the apparent ranking member of UPEO in the eye. Cypher, former merc, I'm good at what I do. Somehow, his eyes told the whole story. Entire volumes of the horrors he'd suffered, and the horrors he'd inflicted in return many, many times over. Commander Shalaji regarded him with a wary curiosity. When was the last time you flew a fighter, Cypher? She questioned. His brow furrowed, like he had remembered something annoying. A long time, he replied with inward-directed frustration. Shalaji exhaled. Well, we'll be lucky we can get 2 aircraft into the sky. Walk with me. She turned and began briskly moving toward a large building roughly a quarter mile away. 20 minutes ago, our last remaining communications link went dead. That link was with the United Nations headquarters. Our strategic communication systems are quintuple redundant, but we were down to landline teletype. The last communication sent was TU-95, and then the line went silent. There was a moment of speechless alarm between the pilots as the trio walked. A Tu-95 Bear didn't need computers, and could reach anywhere on the continent from anywhere else on the continent, all with a payload capable of leveling several city blocks. We know how many? Cypher asked. We do not, but considering the flight time from Snyder's top and the speed of a bear, they could be overhead within 3 hours, Shalaji replied, expression hard and face forward as they continued moving toward the tourist-friendly side of the UPEO base. Cypher saw the gray skies on the way to student tour, the words of his former wingman echoing in his mind. This war would end if they blew everything up. That day, Cypher's whole world had changed. Commander, Fiona asked, oblivious to the horrors of wars fought before she was born. If the cyber attack destroyed our computers, what do we have to fly? The modern pilot had never flown anything with a conventional stick and rudder. This was going to be a culture shock. The UPEO Museum of Aviation, Commander Shalaji gestured to the massive building they were approaching, has the largest collection of flyable historic aircraft on the planet. If the stars align, it will also have something we can strap missiles to. That proved to be overly optimistic. Even the avionics sitting on shelves in storage got roasted, related the facility's head restoration technician, one Avril Mead. She was an athletically built yet compact middle-aged woman, her short brown hair in a pixie cut. But unlike me, you're in luck. We just finished a perfect jet for your troubles last week. Just got the first check flight done yesterday morning, just before this shit. She raised her arms in frustration, looking down at the wheelchair she was in. The cyber attack had fried her leg implant, which she'd gotten after an injury sustained in the first aircraft she had restored many years ago. The more things change, the tech thought, rolling off to lead the party through the museum on the way to the restoration hangar. At least she'd been able to disconnect the wheelchair's motors so she could manually wheel it around. Fiona couldn't help but stare as they passed through the extensive Continental War display. Her expression turned toward the wistful as her eyes flowed across the shrines to old heroes. These pilots knew what it was like to lose friends. In the war's darkest days, it appeared inevitable that the fascist Russian federals would consume the entire continent. Multiple generations on, even Fiona knew all too well that Asia would have gone down a far darker path, if not for the efforts of... The party rounded a corner in the Continental War display. Sitting alone in the space was an old wartime Raptor, an early A model, with a crisp blue triple arrowhead flag covering the wall behind it, and a blue Mobius strip painted on each of its twin tails. Fiona stared in silent awe, her walk unintentionally slowing as she passed the aircraft of the greatest old hero of them all. Cypher paid the craft a glance, then looked away. The pilot gave even less heed as they passed the lighthouse war section of the building, outright ignoring the F-15C with triple talon marks adorning its tails. But when the group entered the restoration hangar, the Belkin War veteran's jaw dropped. Fiona was considerably less affected. "This is the best we can do?" she asked, incredulous. The dark green double delta fighter sat low on its gear, compact and impossibly sleek. The craft had a single, low, radically swept vertical tail emblazoned with 32 in high-visibility yellow. While Cypher was stunned, the lead technician looked at Fiona with visible distaste, arms crossed and head shaking. "This?" She gave a single upward nod at the Draken. "Has a higher body count than your mom does." Fiona was confused for a moment, then shook her head to move past the impropriety of the statement. "Look," Fiona told the tech, "it has to be almost a century old. Would you fly it?" "I have," Avril replied with a toothy grin. "And I would again if not for this bum leg. She handles like a dream. Kinda surprised Cypher didn't stick with her." Suddenly, silence hung in the large hangar space. No one had told Avril the older pilot's name. Fiona and Commander Shalaji looked towards the technician with confusion. all while she continued to admire the ancient jet fighter. Cypher was beginning to come down from the shock of seeing his former aluminum frame. He spoke, his words heavy with contrition. I was an idiot. Chasing easy money and spending money too easy. Avril's eyes practically turned into saucers. You gotta be shitting me! You're him? The 40-something technician asked in disbelief. She was a recent serial viewer of the old Warriors in the Balkan War OBC documentary. The old man with olive skin and silver hair exhaled and shrugged. Yeah. Is the fuel transfer pump still slow? Avril's toothy grin returned. She'd encountered that fault herself. Not anymore. She's factory fresh. Cypher smiled in a way he hadn't in decades. Thank you. Just then, the museum-facing double doors the group entered through swung open once again. The doctor that had saved Cypher and cleared Fiona for flight strode purposefully into the hangar, clipboard at the ready. Commander Shilage, good news! Bravo team should make a full recovery. As the doctor went on about his business, the lead technician grinned at the old Balkan War ace of aces. Can't wait to see the Demon Lord fly for myself, the middle-aged elite technician fangirled. It would be my pleasure. Cypher nodded toward her with a smile. It would be your death! Both Avril and Cypher turned to see the exasperated doctor, who was apparently quite capable of listening to one conversation while holding another. You're not even supposed to be walking around. You pull even 2 Gs anytime in the next 2 days, and the adhesives holding your heart together will shred like toilet paper. It's incredible we even managed to save you in the first place. Cypher looked at the man who'd saved his life the night before, through multiple consecutive medical miracles nonetheless, with contempt. I landed a plane without a heart before. I can do it again. The doc's exasperation only expanded. You call that landing? He shouted, before turning to the commander. He's the reason there's a cargo plane-shaped ash stain on your main runway. Commander Shilage blinked. Fiona's brow furrowed, and Avril threw her head back and cackled. The next words spoken were hers. How do you land a plane during the attack? The scrap queen asked. Mechanical backup, Cypher stated, before thinking for a moment to add, and some creativity. Commander Shilage facepalmed. Regardless, she began, taking charge of the situation. We need every pilot we can get, and you landing heartless doesn't help that. Cypher, teach sister how to fly your plane. I need to remind you all we have bombers incoming, so make it quick. Cypher and Fiona looked at each other. Neither was happy with this situation. Rapidly, Cypher went over the J-35J's flight controls and flight regime, as Avril pre-flighted the aircraft. Starting from the basics, this took some time, but the electrical engine starter had a fault, so Cypher's crash course in not crashing was finally over just as the jet was finally ready. Draken 32 was built in 1960 as an early model jet, before being upgraded in the mid-80s to the J-35J standard. That said, the sensors hadn't yet been restored, and there were no immediately working missiles available, so it was going to be about as old school as a Draken could get. Avril even got an oxygen mask for Fiona's helmet that was compatible with the old jet systems. Finally, the double Delta fighter's engine whined, hissed, and then screamed to life. Fiona prepared to close the canopy as Avril opened the enormous hangar doors. Cypher leaned into the cockpit from the ladder, shouting over the engine to give a final piece of advice. Real jets are more about reflexes than strategy. You don't have the reflexes yet, so treat her with care. Your left hand can be quick on the throttle, but keep your right slow, especially with pitch. Fiona squinted at him, unsure just how much to trust the apparently quite storied old merc. Whatever you say, she appeased. The engine came up to speed, Cypher descended the cockpit ladder, and the junior tech lifted it off the jet. Fiona closed the canopy, then gripped the stick and throttle. Reyna and Eric's faces flashed to her mind. Her eyes narrowed. For Sarf, she thought, slowly pulling out of the hangar. Sister taxied to Newark's smaller alternate runway, the one without a C-5 Galaxy-sized crash site. Looking out of the canopy to see how throttle and ground steering inputs caused the aircraft to move and turn felt disconcerting. All of her jets, even from early training, had been equipped with a connection for flight interface. Operating an aircraft through touch and vision, rather than being plugged into omnispectral sensors directly through her nervous system, felt fundamentally rickety. She had no idea how anyone had flown like this in peacetime, let alone in combat. With a coffin system, all she had to do was think, and powerful computers translated those thoughts into a symphony of control surface movements at the speed of light. This contraption from her previous century required her to think, then move her limbs, and then her limb movements were carried to the control surfaces by hydraulics, all without any computer assistance to maintain stability. This terrified the young pilot. Her expression was determined. There was an enemy out there coming to kill them, and if she could stop them, even with this rickety old heap, she had to try. "Sarf 2, ready for takeoff," she called over the radio, having found herself on the runway. The wreckage of Cypher's conventionally controlled C-5 still smoldered in the distance, off to the left on the main runway. Draken 32's nearly century-old VHF radio set crackled to life. "Sarf 2, this is Dove Control. You're clear for takeoff. Winds 270-10. Good hunting." The museum had a few Recton conflict-era VHF shortwave analog backpack radios on hand, and now the short-range systems were the only means UPEO had for tactical communications. "Copy that, Dove Control. Sarf 2, launching." Fiona pinned the throttle, and the afterburner roared to life, thrusting the compact double delta down the runway at an increasing rate. Sister was a quick study, despite having never flown something like this before, and as Cypher had told her, she gently pulled back on the stick at 130 knots. Draken 32 pitched up, the wind caught under her wings, and Fiona felt herself pushed into the seat as the craft wafted into the air. She retracted the landing gear, but kept the craft in full afterburner. Sister was especially terrified at what the Draken might pull on her at low speed and altitude, where it would be almost impossible to recover. She pulled into the mostly clear blue sky, beginning a slow upward spiral to visually check for incoming aircraft. The practice seemed so archaic as to be comical, but this was the only chance whatsoever they had a chance of finding an incoming enemy. When Fiona had just started training, she had considered the eye exams a goofy relic of a bygone era. Now she cursed her barely average eyesight, scanning the sky for a tiny dot that could easily bring death to her few remaining friends. As she swung up and around through one final spiral to cruising altitude, she noted what appeared to be a thin cloud off in the distance, which narrowed slightly from her vantage point as Draken 32 sliced a circle in the sky. "Sarf 2 to Dove Control, I see a possible contrail bearing 330, moving to intercept." "Copy that, Sarf 2. Attempt to establish radio communication with a bogey and then visually confirm. Over." Back in Newark's control tower, Cypher stood beside Commander Shalaji, watching his beloved Draken vector toward danger with binoculars. He lowered the specs and glared at her. "You want them to shoot first?" Shalaji stared right back into the ace's eyes. "We're UPEO, not mercenaries," the commander informed, settling the matter. If a certain Ocean fighter squadron had shot first instead of confirming what they were locked onto, she and everyone she cared most deeply for would have been dead decades ago. Cypher brought the specs back up to his face, grunting with discontent. Meanwhile, Fiona watched a shiny little dot at the head of the incoming contrail get bigger, while flipping through radio settings and getting no response. As the dot grew wings and became an increasingly massive heavy bomber, the elite SARF pilot decided to switch back to the military guard frequency. If they couldn't hear that, at least, she surmised, getting shot down was going to be on them. "Unidentified Bear Bomber. This is UPEO Special Armed Response. You have entered restricted airspace. Turn to bearing 360 to exit the area or you will be fired upon." There wasn't even static in response as the bear came clearly into view and earshot. The bomber's contra-rotating props battered the air into submission with a roar clearly heard from the fighter's cockpit. Fiona banked her craft and circled around the bomber. She was slowly starting to get a feel for the old controls. Pulling around and behind the Tu-95, she approached from slightly above and to the right. Sister's eyes narrowed as she noted the Erusian roses on its wings and tail. Even in the modern day, such a symbol meant hate to most of the rest of the Asian continent. She keyed the radio to Dove Control. The bear has a Russian federal marking, still no response. A burst of light escaped from the bear's tail, and in the next moment what appeared to be a basketball of flame smeared past Draken 32's canopy, with another coming directly at Sister's face. She yanked the stick back in a panic, and the agile Draken responded instantly. The nose pitched up 90 degrees even as the craft continued forward, making the entire wing and fuselage into an inadvertent air brake and snatching the craft immediately backwards out of the line of fire. Several G's of force slammed Fiona into her seat, but only a moment later she felt weightless as the ancient fighter pitched back down and started to drop out of the sky, its nose bobbing up and down as it began a lazy spin toward oblivion. "I've been fired on!" Fiona grunted out, kicking opposite rudder while slamming the throttle all the way forward. "In a spin, trying to recover." Back in the tower, Cypher let out a sigh no one noticed, as Commander Shalaji grabbed the receiver. "Have you been hit?" she asked with urgency. "Negative," Fiona grunted out again, trying different combinations of control inputs in an attempt to break the spin. The bear was continuing toward Newark, while she was spinning to her death. Cypher took the receiver from Shalaji in a huff, but the commander didn't mind. "Tell me exactly what's happening," the old pilot demanded of the upstart in his airplane. As Draken 32 spun toward the ground, Fiona grunted out the specifics. "Was straight and level. Pitched up hard to dodge fire. Now pitch oscillations of slow port spin," she reported tersely, threw a grimace and an eye on the rapidly cranking altitude gauge. "Listen," Cypher commanded. "When the nose swings up, stick full aft. And as the nose starts to swing down, stick full forward." Fiona continued to watch her altitude rapidly wind down in what appeared to be an unrecoverable stall state. More urgently, she knew the bear would reach UPEO even before she hit the ground. As the nose swung back upward uncommanded for the umpteenth time, Sister slammed the stick backward, and then as the nose pendulumed back downward, she hurled the stick into the control panel. Suddenly, the craft pitched further down as its slow spin halted, falling into a perfectly controlled dive. Fiona exhaled violently as she let the craft pick up speed, and then gently pulled back on the stick to chase down the bear. "I've recovered," she reported, swinging around to put the more coherent end of the bear's contrail back on Draken 32's nose. "Copy," Cypher exhaled with relief of his own. "Pitch slowly." Rocketing after the bear on a plane-sized pillar of flame from the Draken's afterburner, something intuitively clicked in Fiona's mind. From the controls to the control surfaces to the aerodynamics that made the Draken fly, it all suddenly made sense. She was used to flying airplanes with a mind of their own, partnering with the machine to achieve her aims. This antique had no mind, but would handle in predictable ways to the same inputs. If you knew the code to input into the controls, even a death trap like this Draken could pull the same maneuvers as her familiar Typhoon 2. Maybe even some it couldn't. "Bear sighted! He's starting a bombing run!" a UPEO lookout called out in Newark's tower. The Tu-95 had entered a shallow dive, its bomb bay door swinging open. Cypher recognized the variation on dive bombing tactics. The bear wanted to finish off UPEO, and the dive would improve accuracy. The heavy bomber had clearly lined up the hospital, main administration, and their own control tower. If the bombs in that bay dropped, they would likely finish off what was left of the Universal Peace Enforcement Organization, and any hope that the new United Nations could bring relief after this disaster. Fiona was coming into cannon range, dead astern of the enemy bomber, and let out a sustained burst. The Draken's massive twin 30mm cannons let fly, ripping through the air. But Sister had fired too early, and all but 2 of the rounds flew wide of the craft, one shearing off part of the bomber's horizontal tail, and the other wrecking the inboard left engine nacelle. While the bear was wounded, it wasn't nearly enough to end the bombing run. As smoke trailed from the ruined nacelle, the bear's twin 23mm tail-mounted autocannons trained precisely on the small fire and returned fire with shocking skill. This time, Fiona only popped the stick back momentarily before hauling it sideways, deftly keeping Draken 32 under control while pitching up hard and then rolling. The fighter followed a forward-facing spiral, a barrel roll, which evaded the massive cannon shells arcing its way while putting it directly underneath the center line of the enemy bomber, skimming underneath the arc of the tail cannons, but with too much speed. The Draken was going to overshoot the bear. There was no time for a second pass. In the snapshot as the fighter began to pass under the bomber, Fiona saw the large forms of UGBLs begin to drop free from the bomb bay. Instinctually, she knew the right code for this. A hard yank back on the stick forced a 90-degree pitch up even as the fighter continued forward, and immediately the first dropped bomb filled the gyro-stabilized crosshairs of the Draken. Fiona pulled the trigger, and Dragonary 2's last dozen rounds pounded into the bear's open bomb bay full of dropping ordnance. From Newark Tower, the huge form of the bear was instantly replaced by a flash of light that collapsed into a spherical fireball. Cypher's eyes snapped away from the flash, but on looking back saw Dragonary 2 shoot out of the sphere flame. The close aboard detonation severely spidered the Draken's canopy and blew away one of its double redundant hydraulic systems, but Sister managed to wrestle and soothe the hurt airplane safely back onto the tarmac at Newark. No further aircraft were spotted by the recently placed radio-equipped lookouts, and Shalaji called the mission complete. As she shut down the engine, an immense fatigue fell over Fiona, yet she smiled. Sarf's combat debut was successful, even with Fia as the squadron's last remaining member. She figured Reyna and Eric would have been proud. A junior technician set the aircraft ladder beside the Draken's nose, and a newly minted combat pilot somewhat shakily pulled herself out of the cockpit and returned to terra firma amongst the cheers of UPEO personnel who had run to meet the returning fighter. Soon after, Cypher walked up and stood just outside the crowd, glaring at the damaged Draken with crossed arms and a face full of disapproval. After glad-handing Avril and some in the crowd, Fiona went to give the angry old man an olive branch. "The Cobra maneuver feels natural in one of these. I kind of get why you like it," she offered, peeling off her helmet. Cypher scowled at the young pilot. "It's called a court parade for short parry. The Yuktobanians didn't invent it. They just gave it a worse name," he lectured. Fiona was more taken aback than offended. Cypher continued. "You opened up too soon with the cannons, and you need to think about your speed before you put your target behind you or fall out of the sky." "Yeah," Fiona allowed. "Still got him, though." She was new to flying antiques, but she was not new to being a fighter pilot. Cypher grunted, begrudgingly coming to respect the little brunette. "You did. Maybe one day you'll amount to something." The septuagenarian ace of aces turned to Avril and jerked a thumb at his Draken. "Can you fix her?" There was a laugh in the lead technician's smile. "Yep." Cypher nodded with relief. "Thanks. Next time she's mine." Next time on Shattered Electrosphere, answering a desperate Newcom distress call, Fiona and Cypher learn the truth behind the Nemo disaster and just how dangerous the world has become.